You've spelunked into the Matt Cave. Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Matt Cave. Thank you all so much for spelunking on by. This week, we have more news from the hockey club, the Utah Jazz, and men's basketball around these parts. BYU's making moves, and Utah, well, I think maybe Mark Harlan, the AD of Utah, listens to my show and doesn't like me. I'll go over what happened there and why I think that way. It's obviously a joke, but I'll go over that. And then my early impressions of the new Monster Hunter Wilds, will be at the tail end of this episode. So thank you all so much for being here. As always, please like, rate, review, share, subscribe, comment, wherever it is, however you listen. Helps out a ton. I say it every week, and I'll continue to say it every week. Each and every one of you are amazing in your own right, and thank you for being here. The only way for me to get this podcast out is through you and word of mouth, and you've done an amazing job, and I just want to thank you for that, and just to tell you to keep going. And, yeah, that's really where we're at with that. I am debating whether I want to remove myself from Facebook and Meta altogether. But for now, you can still find my podcast on Facebook. It is the Matt Cave Podcast there. You can find me on YouTube as well, the Matt Cave Podcast, all one word. And I will keep plugging my Twitch because eventually I will get back on to twitch.tv/mattscave, MATTS Cave. And you can find me there every weeknight or weekend. We'll see how my schedule works out as we move forward in the new big boy job. But let's start with the hockey club. Man, what a fun homestand. I know it didn't end in the way we'd want it to, but technically four straight home wins. It's the best home performance that the club has had all season. It was four straight because before the Four Nations / All-Star break, they did beat Philadelphia at home 3-2, and John Tortorella, the awesome coach of the Flyers, had nothing but praise for both the team as well as the fans. So that was good news. And then they had a 3-game winning streak against the Canucks, Blackhawks, and Wild before the Devils came to town to ruin the party. But overall, I was very impressed with the defense. The defense gave up, what is it, 6 goals over 4 games? That's incredible. That is great. That is exactly what I think that Andre Tierney, the coach of Utah Hockey Club, and Bill Armstrong, the GM, had in mind when they put that defensive unit together. This is really the first extended period of time that we've had where the back line has been healthy. The blue liners are healthy, and they're playing. And that's great. What the homestand also showed is that Utah needs a go-to goal scorer, and while Dylan Guenther is turning into that, if they want to take the next step, they need to find that guy, but also they need a stronger presence up the middle in the center position. I think that is overlooked from a lot of these other commentators about Utah Hockey Club. The center position is pretty weak for the club. So I've looked around and I've done my homework, and there is a lot out there that is available that is achievable for the club to go get. Because if you look at the centers right now, you got Nick Bjugstad, excuse me, Nick, sorry, Logan Cooley, Barrett Hayton, Jack McBain, Nick Schmaltz, and Kevin Stenlund are really the centers that they tend to keep on the roster and in the 5 lines that they put out each night. None of those guys really strike fear into you. Logan Cooley is turning into that guy, but he is still 20 years old. So having somebody in front of him that is the guy, that can be the guy moving forward, will be critical, I think. Not just for success on the ice, but to drive Logan Cooley even more. And when I look at the centers for the Utah Hockey Club, they are predominantly left-handed shot. So they're only Nick Bjugstad, Schmaltzy, and Kevin Stenlund are right-handers. So to that end, I did some looking around, And there is some trade chatter out there that the Anaheim Ducks are shopping around their 2 young centers that had a lot of expectations poured on them when they came into the league. Mason McTavish and Trevor Zegras. Now, for you scholarly, I guess you could say, or nerdy NHL fans, Trevor Zegras was the cover athlete for NHL 2 years ago. So there is expectations for him. And apparently around the league, there is a sentiment that he needs somebody that will outwork him to really drive Trevor Zegras into being the kind of player that everyone thought he could be. And we have that here in Utah. We have 2 that just spring to mind. First is Clayton Keller, the captain, and then the other is Mikhail Sergachev. Those 2 guys are going to outwork him. And so if Utah can swing a trade with Anaheim, who are falling out of the playoff race as we inch closer to the trade deadline, I would like to see Utah swing a trade with Anaheim for one of those 2 guys. Preferably Trevor Zegras, but Mason McTavish is really good too. So either way, I would be very happy. And that would also set Utah up for the future because, yeah, sure, they'd have to give up some draft picks, but they would also send back an expiring contract. So overall, it would be just a huge win-win for pretty much everyone. And the guys that are on an expiring contract are Nick Bjugstad, Alexander Kerfoot. I mean, these are guys that they can send back. Another name that's popped up in the trade chatter is Lawson Krause. I don't think Utah Hockey Club is going to get rid of him. He's an associate captain. He will always mix it up for his guys. I don't see that happening. But there are a couple of extra guys on the blue line now that we have everybody back and healthy that they could get rid of, like Robert Bortuzzo. He hasn't really been on the ice at all this season because he's been injured. And with the way the blue line is playing now with everyone back, I think he can be one of those expendable contracts. So they could send him back as well for one of these 2 centers. That's what I want to see them do. Will they do it? I'm going to say probably not. If I'm looking at this, if I put my GM hat on, and I'm not looking at this season as just everything, and you extrapolate for what's to come, there are expiring contracts. Utah already has the most cap space of any team in the NHL going into this offseason, where guys like Rantanen, that I've talked about a few times, could potentially be available. So I would think that if I'm Bill Armstrong and I have an owner like Ryan Smith who is willing and wanting to spend money on this roster, maybe I'm just going to stand pat at the deadline, let those contracts expire, not take on extra money, and then just go wild in the free agent market trying to land one of those superstars. And who knows, maybe something will shake loose from the other teams. Like a goalie. Maybe Connor Hellebuck. I don't know. But somebody will shake loose in the offseason. It happens every year in every sport. So if I have my GM hat on and I'm Bill Armstrong, I'm sitting there thinking, if a trade materializes with one of these teams, I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth, and I'm going to look through this. I'm going to work through it and do my thing. But I have this owner that wants to spend money. I have some expiring contracts here, and most of my guys are locked up long-term. Like the key pieces, Dylan Guenther, Clayton Keller, Mikhail Sergachev, like those guys are locked up. Maybe I just ride this out and we'll see what happens. Get the young guys some run in playoff wild card competition hockey, get the growth, and then next year we go nuts. So it's a very delicate balance. It's a tightrope he has to walk because he's got a brand new fan base that he wants to keep energized. Utah is one of 6 teams in the NHL to sell out every home game, and that's impressive because Utah is currently 12, 13, and 6 at home. That's not a great record, but they sell out every night, just like the Jazz. I mean, we don't have much else to do here in Utah. So it's a delicate balance he has to strike. And if I were sitting in the chair, I would keep Utah's name out there in the trade market with all of the news outlets and all the reporters being like, yeah, we're looking at everything. Nothing's off the table. Because then the fans are happy because the team's getting talked about, but then they're not going to get shoehorned into a deal that's going to be bad long term. My dream is that they trade for Philip Forsberg from Nashville, but he's not going anywhere. He's a Predator for life, and so that's not going to happen. And that would be a terrible trade for Utah to make long term because he's on the wrong side of 30, just like myself, and there's not many years left, and they would have to give up a trove to get him. But that's like my NHL 2025 video game dream trade, is to pry him loose. But he also has a full no-trade clause in his contract. So, yeah, and that's really what I'm thinking will happen at the trade deadline, is Utah's name will be thrown around for pretty much anyone who's on the market. If a deal is to be made, I would like it to be for Trevor Zegras or for Mason McTavish. Either way, I think would be amazing. And then they could get, somebody like a Rantanen in the free agent market and then be basically a lock for playoff contention. Because there's like 3 guys, I think, on the club that have warranted a new contract. Karel Vejmelka absolutely 100% needs a new contract. There's not going to be a better goalie that shakes loose, I don't think. And Connor Ingram isn't as bad as this season has shown for him. He's there's a lot of backstory there. I'm not going to get into it because that's his personal life, and that's not what I do on this show. But he's had a rough year off the ice, and that's affected him on the ice. So I think next season he'll be better too. So while the goalie situation isn't stellar like it is for like the Winnipeg Jets or for the Florida Panthers, it's still better than most clubs. So I think the goalie position, Karel Vejmelka has earned himself a new contract. And then I think Lasse Krause has earned himself a new contract, 100%. And that's really it. I mean, there could be a couple of other guys in there. Spicy Tuna, Liam O'Brien, I think should stick around because he's a fan favorite, and I don't think he would be that expensive. And he's a guy who will mix it up for his team. He's a 4th, 5th liner who he'll throw his body around, and he'll make life difficult for the other team. So I really think that's it as far as like re-signing people, because there's such a glut of young talent coming up that they don't need to panic and sign veterans that they would have to overpay for. Which is also another thing. I know I've been talking about the club for a while on this episode. I'm going to stop here soon, but it's an interesting thing because with the Jazz, we are not a free agent destination. But from everything I'm hearing and seeing for the club, Utah Hockey Club is a free agent destination. New young club, new young owner. It's a winter sports haven, and we love our teams. We will ride and die with our teams. Just look at the University of Utah fan base, the BYU fan base, even Utah State, and the Jazz. We ride and die with our teams. So it's interesting. But that's my prediction. It was like a 13-minute prediction, but there you go. For what I think Utah Hockey Club will do, and they are still only 2 points out of a wild card spot. That's incredible because this time last year, they had already fallen apart. They lost every game in February. So they've already come a very long way, and they're still in it. And it's going to be a very exciting ride, no matter what happens at the trade deadline. All right, so let's move it right along. Let's talk about Real Salt Lake for a little bit here. So Real Salt Lake is still going to have a very rough year. They got gifted an own goal at the start of the game against Seattle, and the rest of the time it was pretty much easy sailing because there wasn't much pressure on the net. And I just also want to throw this little factoid out there for everybody. Seattle has a lifetime record at Rio Tinto, because I refuse to call it the other name. Their all-time record there is 1 win, 13 losses, 4 draws. That's their all-time record coming to Rio Tinto. And they failed to score in their last 6 trips. So with all of that, you would think Real Salt Lake would win, and they did. So there was the own goal, and then Forster Ahago scored late in the second half to kind of put the game to bed. Overall, it was a very blasé game. Pretty much even possession, a ton of shot attempts both sides. Not many corner kicks, so it was a lot of knocking the ball around and not much happening, is really what it boils down to. Real Salt Lake is in for a rough year any way you slice it, and I think Seattle is as well, which is rare, but Seattle is coming off the back end of one of their golden eras, and so they need to replace everyone, and they're in the process of doing that. So we are in a better spot than we were last week, for sure, with Real Salt Lake. It was also embarrassing losing to a team from Costa Rica in the CONCACAF Nations League, but we're here, and I don't think it's going to get much better. So that's just an update for Real Salt Lake. Let's move it along to the Utah Jazz, who won again. And people are trying to say it was a good win because it was against Minnesota, and if Minnesota does not make the playoffs, then that's another lottery pick for the Jazz, and I don't like hearing that. Because when you look at the Jazz roster, it's so young, and I think it's one of the youngest in the league. They don't need more rookies. They don't need an injection of young talent. What they need is that number 1 or number 2 overall pick this season with a franchise-altering player like Cooper Flagg or Dylan Harper. And with them winning, that ruins that. It does. There's no other way to slice it, and I'm not happy about it. Some fans are like, yeah, we beat Minnesota, we get another lottery pick if they don't make the playoffs, and this is great. No, it's not. Because there's like 4 veterans on the team, and then everybody else is younger than 23. That's really where it's at with Utah. So they need to get supercharged with one of those generational players of Cooper Flagg or Dylan Harper, and they need to lose. They need to lose. And them winning does nothing good, really. It does nothing good. What they need is to be in close games at the end of the game against teams that are fighting for playoff position and losing. I've said this all year, that this is what needs to happen. So that's what they need to do moving forward. There's a key game coming up tonight, as I'm recording this on Sunday, against the New Orleans Pelicans. Currently, the Jazz are either a game ahead or a game behind, however you want to slice that one, for the worst overall record in the Western Conference. They need to lose this game. Everybody needs to be hurt. Everybody needs to be rested. And there should not be any sniff of a chance of a win. The New Orleans Pelicans are 16-44. The Jazz are 15-44. That's a half game difference. The Jazz need to lose. They need to lose. And if they don't, then the tank was not successful. Because then they move ahead of 3 teams. That's not good. All right, let's move it along to men's basketball here in the state of Utah. And let's start with the University of Utah. Literally the day after I heaped praise on Craig Smith, the now former head coach of the University of Utah Runnin' Utes men's basketball team, Mark Harlan fires him. Okay. And then they promptly went out and got blown out by Arizona. Yeah. I think if they would have kept him, they would have put up a better fight against Arizona. They did come back and beat a very shorthanded Arizona State team. Arizona State right now has like 8 scholarship players in their rotation. So, yeah, they beat Arizona State by 26 at home. And then they've got West Virginia and BYU to wrap up the season. Suffice it to say, they are not making the tournament. If they beat Arizona, and I think they would have had a strong chance were Craig Smith still there, they had a sniff of being a bubble team, depending on how they performed in the Big 12 tournament. But now, their season's basically over. I don't see them beating West Virginia, even though West Virginia just got blown out by BYU. And teams this year, historically, when they've had to play both BYU and Utah in the same week, they do not perform very well, whether it's the elevation or whatever it is. I mean, it's hard to play in the Marriott Center down in Provo for BYU, and then it's also becoming harder, again, to play against the University of Utah at home. that's kind of where we're at with Utah. I don't understand the thinking. I really don't. I don't. Really what it boils down to is I think what Utah is looking at is what other teams in the Big 12 are doing as far as like NIL spending and their ability to recruit players both locally and internationally. And they're falling behind and they don't like it. So they made this rash decision. In my opinion, rash decision. I don't like it. Again, I mean, they were trending in the right direction. Like the Big 12 is the most difficult men's basketball conference in the country. It is. Top to bottom. But whatever. I mean, a winning record in your first season here against an infinitely more difficult schedule than the Pac-12, you're going to wind up with at least a winning record, because even if Utah loses their final 2 games, they have a winning record on the season, 16-15. I don't think anybody before the season would have predicted that. I think most people predicted them to have the same record as a Colorado or Oklahoma State even. Colorado is sitting at 11-17 and Oklahoma State is sitting at 14-15. I think that was a more realistic expectation than Utah finishing above 500. And Craig Smith did it. But Mark Harlan, in his infinite wisdom, probably threw a temper tantrum, ran out to the refs in the middle of the street, said, "You rigged the season against us," and so he fired Craig Smith. All right. Let's talk about BYU now. The school that haunts the nightmares of one Mark Harlan. And they blew out West Virginia. I was a little worried about that game because it is a trap game. Classic trap game, because they travel to Iowa State on March 4th, which is a Tuesday night, and face off against a top 10 Iowa State team that just is coming off a victory over Arizona. This is a humongous game. Any way you slice it, humongous game. Iowa State and BYU are now tied for third in the Big 12 at 12-6. If BYU wins this game, instead of being a virtual lock for the NCAA tournament, they will be a lock. Because you cannot ignore what BYU has done to wrap up this season. After losing against Cincinnati, they have rattled off 7 straight wins. 6 straight wins. I can count, I promise. 6 straight wins. And then if they beat Iowa State, that is 7. That is a top 10 victory. And then they have a home game against Utah, which, rivalry game, it's going to be weird. Just ask the University of Utah women and the BYU women. The University of Utah women had to hit a crazy half-court shot to win the game in a game they were favored by 20-something points. So nobody will really know what will happen in Provo on the 8th. But this is humongous. And it'll be very interesting to see the trajectory the team is taking, because right now it's all shooting straight up. They blew out Kansas. They beat Arizona on the road. They beat Arizona State on the road to follow that up in a letdown game because you're tired, emotions, whatever. And then they come home in a potential letdown game, look-ahead game, and they blow out the competition by 21. So the team is trending in the right direction. This will be a fantastic test of what is going on in Provo right now. If BYU wins, they're in the tournament, and they could be a top 4 seed, all things considered, because they will be ranked, and they're going to be ranked higher off of this week, even though Arizona and Kansas have run into a rough patch. Those are still impressive wins against 2 blue blood programs. And I'm just excited to see what's happening here. Because at the beginning of the season, I was telling you all, keep your expectations tempered here. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know the team and how they're going to mesh together. We don't know Kevin Young's coaching style. This is his first head coaching gig. It's his first time coaching in college basketball. There is the big talent, Edgar Demon, who is coming from European basketball to the American game, to vastly different styles of play. And it started off pretty much exactly how I said it would, but now there's real expectations for this team. And it'll be interesting to see what happens as they wrap up the season in their final 2 games. One in Ames, Iowa, against a top 10 Iowa State team, and then at home in the Holy War against Utah. All right, so that is the sports talk for this week. I'm going to segue now into what I've experienced with Monster Hunter Wilds and why I'm very pleased. We all know, earlier this month, I was so disappointed in a game that I refunded it. And it's a game series that I have historically loved. If you look at my Steam playtime for Civilization 5 and Civilization 6, it might make your eyes water. That is how much time I've put into those games. I love Civilizations 5 and 6. They're among my favorite, they call them 4X strategy games. They are my favorite 4X strategy games. To give you an idea, I have 638 hours in Civilization 6. And then in Civilization 5, it's not quite as much, but it's 232 and a half hours. So almost 1,000 hours in Civilization games, the past two. And then Civilization 7 came out, and it really just, it let everybody down. It's not a good game. And it makes me very sad, because Civilization is one of those games, it's one of those cornerstone games, or at least I thought it was, where you just could count on it. But right now on Steam, it has 25,500 reviews. And it is 50% of the reviews are positive, or 50% of the reviews are negative, however the glass sits for you. And I don't really see a way for them to turn that around. I just don't. So they swung and missed. So that really made me scared for Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter has been around for decades. It has been on the DS, it's been on the Nintendo platforms forever. And it recently, I say recently, it came out, Monster Hunter World came out about 10 years ago now for all consoles. Xbox, PlayStation, computer, Nintendo, all of it. And it was a smash hit. Even the guys that made Monster Hunter were so surprised at how well Monster Hunter World did that they could barely keep up with the demand of new monsters coming out, new content, how fast to release the expansion, Iceborne. So, yes, it was a smash hit. And then they released Monster Hunter Rise to very mixed reviews. It was not quite what everybody wanted from as a sequel from them. Even they have said a couple of times they fell short in what they wanted to do. And so this was a huge game for Capcom, the publishers of Monster Hunter, and the guys who make Monster Hunter. And they've hit it out of the park. I love this game so far. I'm only to Chapter 2. My Hunter rank is only 4 of 12, so I'm about a third of the game through. I think 12 is the cap. I'm not sure. I've kept myself spoiler-free, so don't come at me for not knowing the Hunter cap. But I'm Hunter rank 4, and Chapter 2, Section 4, whatever you want to call it, is where I'm at the point of recording this. As soon as I'm done editing this show and publishing it, I'm going straight into Monster Hunter. I played it on Saturday for about 10 hours. So yes, you could say I'm enjoying the game. And it's very beginner-friendly as well. And it doesn't make it feel to players that are coming back that they have to trudge through an annoying and drawn-out like tutorial or walkthrough to get through the first part. It's all very fun. All of it. And so I encourage everyone, if you're interested in becoming a hunter who fights for the Monster Hunter Guild that takes down these giant creatures with really cool weapons, if you want to experience that, Monster Hunter Wilds is your game. It's so much fun. On my review scale of buy it no matter what, buy it if you like the series, wait for it to go on sale, or avoid completely, it's a buy it. It's up there. It is a buy it. And it's already, like, we're 2 months into the year. This could be Game of the Year. We'll see what happens with the rest of the stuff coming out this year. There are some bangers coming up. But suffice it to say, Monster Hunter Wilds is the leader in the clubhouse. All right, that's the episode this week, everybody. Thank you all so much for listening, and I will see you all next week after the NHL trade deadline, I believe, when we spelunk back into the Matt Cave.